on this webinar, and it will be posted to the SLCAN website for your reference. So without further ado, let's get on to this month's topic. So we're absolutely delighted to present to you John Bells from RWDI and Gordon Robbins from the University of Toronto. John and Gordon will be presenting on commissioning for labs and the owner's perspective. John is RWDI's Technical Director of Commissioning and helps new and existing buildings achieve their full potential. John is an award-winning building commissioning professional with more than 16 years of testing and commissioning experience and hundreds of projects across diverse sectors and industries, from laboratories and data centres to commercial, educational and power generation facilities. Gordon Robbins is an operations professional with 30+ years of experience and is currently at the director level with an in-depth experience in site management, turnarounds, organisational transformation, team-driven cost reduction, lean initiatives, and project management within the buildings, food and pharmaceutical industries. And so with that, I'd like to hand over to John and Gordon.
Thank you, Dawn, for the intro. Thank you to everyone to obviously joining. Gordon and I are quite passionate about this topic, so this is going to be exciting for us. So let's get started. Okay, so commissioning for labs and the owner's perspective. Obviously, as a commissioning consultant, I'll be taking that part on, and then of course Gordon's going to jump in on his part. So there's us. You can see us in the video as well. All right, so here's our agenda for today. I'm going to speak to the general commissioning process because I think it's important for us to kind of establish that as a baseline. We're going to be talking about the OPR, the owner's project requirements, and how that's of course a key and very important document. And we're going to be talking about how that document is actually developed. Right, it's a document that is all too often reverse engineered and poorly constructed. And I think this industry in general can do a better job at this. And Gordon can speak to his experiences with this document as well. Okay. And then I'm going to basically skip through the entire commissioning, testing process and get to the analytics side. Hopefully most folks are aware of the testing piece, and I'm going to speak to that briefly, but I want to talk about how analytics can modernize and support some of the initiatives and testing side that we need to do. Okay, and then Gordon's going to round out the presentation on his perspective as it relates to commissioning and laboratories, and then of course the development of their commissioning standard, and then the pair of us will talk about lessons learned. So that'll be kind of the fun part, and I'm sure we'll get lots of Q&A on that. All right, so briefly, we'll talk about the commissioning process. So here is kind of an outline of the essential phases in any project, but of course you can see the ongoing commissioning or OCX phase on your far right. What we're trying to get at here is that hiring an independent commissioning professional in the design phase or even in the pre-design phase is the standard. That is supposed to be the way it works. If we are hired or the commissioning provider is hired after construction has started or the subcontracting team has been awarded, then it gets a bit messy because of course we're now asking that team to support us on the testing side. And of course, as everyone can relate, they might have their hands out, and rightfully so, for some additional costs to the project. So hiring your commissioning professional early, SD, DD is fine, or before that is great too. Okay, so you can see some of the key deliverables outlined here. I'm not going to go into too much depth. If you have questions about what happens in this, then of course please provide those through the Q&A. But essentially, it's a commissioning plan. Those specs are critically important, but as discussed, that OPR, the owner's project requirements, is our roadmap, right? I consider myself a technical watchdog. Some people don't really care for the term, But that's the way I look at it. We're there on behalf of the owner to ensure, as an advocate, that they get what they paid for. And that means that we're going to have to trust the contracting team to do that, and the design team, of course, but we're going to have to verify, right? Trust but verify. Okay. So everyone should be familiar with the testing process. That's the heart of commissioning and forever will be. But I want to speak to how we can augment, how we can complement that testing process by using data to support our boots on the ground effort. I'm not talking about replacing. That can't be done. We just need to make sure that we understand those two differences. Okay. Occupancy, seasonal testing, this should be all fairly familiar with folks, but if not, again, we can go through that. And then the ongoing commissioning piece is something that is not well understood in the industry. But if we're going to do all this great work about making our buildings or making these systems or making these laboratories perform better during the testing and occupancy phase, then we should be interested in maintaining it. Every building experiences some level of drift over time, and making sure that we stay on top of that is critical. Okay. So the quick version through commissioning is we develop these test plans, right? So these test plans would be, on fume hoods, would be on the exhaust systems, would be on the supply air as it relates to makeup air for a space, right? Terminal units, all of those things. So we would take the sequence of operation as determined by the design team and by the controls contractor. We would pull that out and then say, okay, here's our test procedure. We expect this and this and this to happen. What's our expected response, right? And then, of course, really, really easy. Either it passes or it fails, right? And then, of course, we move on to the next test. So the typical systems that we commission, as outlined by the University of Toronto, you can see there on the side. But that's, of course, HVAC, building automation and controls, lighting control, and that sort of thing. Okay, so what is an OPR? The Building Commissioning Association defines the OPR as the following. But at the end of the day, what the OPR is a document that outlines the functional and operational requirements for the project. Again, the basis of design from the design team is supposed to build their BOD or their design narrative based on this document. The owner should at no point at the end of the project say, this isn't what I wanted, right? These systems don't work the way I wanted. That's unacceptable. So the job of a commissioning provider is to be there for them throughout this process. But as projects get value engineered, as they all too often do, and that's fine, we just need to make sure that they understand the pros and cons of making that change. And that needs to be documented. Okay, so this OPR is a living document. All right. One of the key aspects that is often overlooked is having those uncomfortable discussions early on, roundtable, perhaps not in person, obviously in this current environment, hopefully soon. But ultimately, these are the 10 basic and main points that we should be going over and we should be asking about, right? So it's up to Gordon Robbins and their team at U of T to provide some answers. And if they don't know, that's what the rest of the cross-functional team is there for. So we can kick around some ideas and say, okay, here are our expectations on longevity of equipment, the manufacturers of that equipment. How much do we want redundancy? How is this actually going to be maintained? Do our operations team or facility manager or those maintenance folks, do they need training on this? Because we're thinking about going VRF or heat pumps, but nobody here within our team knows anything about that. That seems to be something that we should focus on the training side. So those are the types of things that we go over and outline. Okay. So the last thing about what I wanted, and again, I'm skipping through a lot of the testing process here, but what I want to drive home is building analytics as a tool. Okay. it sets us up extremely well if we can use the data, not just for alarms on the automation system, but we can use the analytics to constantly monitor how our building is performing. Because guess what? I'm only human, just like every one of us. And if I test a system or my team tests a system or any commissioning provider tests, that's a Tuesday in the afternoon, right? We're going to simulate as best as we can, but in the shoulder season or on a design day, the system might react a little bit differently. Again, we're going to do our very best with what we can, right? Simulate as best you can the entire sequence of operation. But there are some controllers and some logic within some equipment that makes up decisions on its own. And that's great for efficiency or economizer function or what have you. But again, we might not be able to test that. So having something that continuously monitors is a really good idea. And it's going to provide it. This is a simple dashboard here. They're all relatively the same. And there's different types of analytics systems out there. But at a commissioning and testing level, we should be looking at this throughout that first year warranty period and beyond. Because that's when things are going to go sideways for us, or when we're going to have some of those major issues. And it's better to deal with those during warranty than having to deal with them afterwards, just like the way we, run our cars, right? You get it in there, 10-month, 11-month warranty review. That's something the commissioning provider does. But having this is extremely important to end up with a great, highly performing building. So I will essentially leave it at that and turn the torch over to Gordon for his perspective.
Hi, I'm Gordon Robbins. I want to talk to you about what I see commissioning as being, and if we could just move to the first screen. Commissioning is really the quality control tool that ensures the delivery of the client's requirements. And the client in my world can be anywhere from a world-class research person, professional, to a person running a cafeteria, to a residence. We have 150 buildings, about 14 million square feet, and absolutely everything that you could find in the 42nd largest city in Canada here. So we really need to understand what the deliverables are. Our clients need to be very definitive. And to that point, we spend possibly up to 2 or 3 years putting together the user requirement, or what we call project planning report. It goes through everything from the business expectations right down to what the floors look like and how they want the building to feel. And we build a number of world-class buildings here to that perspective. The commissioning, to me, with the commissioning agent is a relationship that is as definitive with respect to the success of the project as the person who builds. And in fact, it's not uncommon for me to tell a commissioning agent that they are as accountable as the constructor, because they are the people who make sure that the constructor does what the design engineer wants them to do, what the OPR wants them to do, with the right product, with the right deliverable. So I don't have a problem holding a commissioning agent accountable in the same room as the constructor under the same conversation, because that's really where we are. We hire them as a person who works directly for the university, obviously because they work for us, and we expect them to be on the field all the time. When I want to talk about deliverable verification, because it's different. We're talking about commissioning. Commissioning is a series of performance and verification tests that confirm the facility and the equipment operates as per the design intent and specifications. We can have the wrong design intent and the wrong specifications and still have great commissioning. So we need to make sure that commissioning starts early and understands the OPR, as well as the design engineers, as well as the client. And I want to talk about that later. Whereas validation, typically used in the pharma world, confirms that the method installed achieves the intended objective and is suitable for the expected purpose using empirical evidence. Did what they designed and created actually land and give us what we want? That's the validation. And I'm going to only talk about commissioning, but I want to make that differentiation because it's so important that you get the OPR correct in any aspect of this. You just go to the next screen. Commissioning at the University of Toronto is based on a number of attributes, and I'd like to take you through the life cycle of a project. We run standards that are quite definitive in the university sector. We run standards for buildings, what we want the buildings to look like, how we want them to operate. We run specific standards for BAS, building automation systems, and we are developing specific standards for labs so that we can define what a lab is relative to what a classroom is, because often we're putting labs and classrooms in the same world, and we need to be able to define that at level 2, what we call level 2+, and level 3, of which we have 2 of them. We are moving toward building envelope, and in fact have a sustainability platform that we're working from to ensure that we can move into that area. We also take, and if we can just stay there for a minute, we also run building analytics continuously, and indeed do go over the designs ourselves continuously after we build buildings. And we do find issues where the building did not deliver to the point where we needed it to deliver to, and not in performance, but actually in design. So we actually see that happen. So the owner project requirements, we've talked about that and how important it is. It's important to bring the commissioning agent in at SD. I have been in situations where we did an SD analysis relative to the project requirements. The person who did it did a phenomenal job, 24 pages of aspects where they did not meet our standards, they did not abide by our standards, and actually went back to the designers and had them change that. That's not abnormal. The designers typically take, even if you have your in-house standards, they typically will migrate to their standards, and we really need to keep them on what we want. We've decided that as an institution, we make sure they're there. Design development, again, we're going back through design development before it is signed off and making sure that the OPR and the schematic design is depicted accurately in the design development and intent, in the standard application, and in the overall design. Because if you vary in any of these steps, you will have issues in the end. The construction document, that goes out, and typically that's the document that is issued for construction. Again, it is reviewed by the commissioning agent, and it is signed off to say that yes, that's what we want, and it follows the precursor expectations. Construction administration, typically where we start talking about commissioning, but is exactly the wrong place to start talking about commissioning and actually hiring commissioning agents, is incredibly important, because the 3 stages, IQ, OQ, and PQ, the IQ, we need to know that what the design engineer designed and specified is actually delivered to site. And the contractor is actually responsible under the commissioning plan to check everything that comes on site the day of delivery and document and sign and date that they actually receive the right piece of equipment. And too often, we all know that the wrong thing arrives, and 6 months later, you're trying to make a decision how to work with something that is in the spec, and you usually don't have a choice, you have to adopt it. That is why the IQ is so important, and we review the IQs on a table that's provided to the contractor, and they sign off for that. The contractor actually, in the business agreement that we sign at the beginning of the engagement, is actually signing that they will follow the commissioning agent's recommendations. That is in our business document going out. OQ does what they deliver actually work. And too often you find something that somebody shipped you and it's the right thing, it's the right model, but it doesn't work. So we have to make sure that it works. So we get it and we install it and we make sure it works as part of the OQ. The PQ doesn't work with everything else. Sometimes things don't work with everything else, and we actually have people go through and actually check under the auspices, direct auspices of the commissioning agent to make sure that everything goes together and it works, because often it doesn't. At the end, we have project closure and we have formal sign off. Sign off comes from my desk. I review all the commissioning documents. Obviously, in sections, there are things that are more important than others, and all the deficiencies. And the deficiencies must be closed before I sign that document. And you can ask John, but I do hold documents here until I get my O&M manuals, my balancing reports, everything that architectural drawings, all the aspects of drawings, mechanicals, everything before the sign off, because obviously if I don't have that, I don't have a finished project. If we can just move to the next screen. How does this really work? Because I've been to conferences and I've talked to universities across North America, and they've said commissioning is a waste of time. You only get what you inspect, and you only get what you expect. So we at the university have a responsibilities and accountabilities relationship with our capital projects. The OPR is created by the client, and we will take them through how to do that, and we will make sure that they understand, and we're actually very, very good at that. From an operations perspective, when we get into creating their vision, we do have design standards. They are on the internet. You can view them. Everything that I speak to is there. We have engaged project delivery agreements that are required with project reviews as the project develops. We, from operations, have a lot of control of the commissioning. It's not unusual for us to take the commissioning agent and sit down with them and understand where they are outside of the capital project, so that we know, because we actually have all the projects on the site delivered to us on a annual basis, and we run over $2 million worth of projects on site, so the flow is huge. The commissioning deliverables are created by operations and signed off as they go through the project cycle, and the project cycle is a gated cycle. In capital projects, they deliver projects using a stage gate methodology with sign-offs at each gate, SD, BD, CD, and as we move through the project to ensure that everybody knows where we're going. A couple of reasons. One is that we want to make sure we're in control of the project. The other reason is that we want to make sure that those change orders that we make early in the project as we start constructing, when we find things, don't change where the OPR is, because sometimes they can. And we very careful to ensure that we don't change order ourselves out of scope. But change orders are inevitable. Anybody who's been in projects knows that. And again, we talked about discrete commissioning stages. We are going through that. And it creates accountability between operations and capital project. It creates that bond that we need, to the point where we have a manager of standards and a manager of project engagement to make sure that this system works. And when you're running that much money on this many projects, you really need that focus. We can just go to the next screen. Great. Okay, the next one. At U of T, we base our building commissioning standards on CSA Z3 2011, and we use that. It's a foundation of all our methodology. Yes, we have added, yes, we have moved a little bit around that based on who we are and where we are, but that is the basis of our standards. And the management of commissioning is really ingrained in the facilities and services and university capital projects relationship. I walk down to the executive director and her and I have a conversation about commissioning. We will walk out to a project manager and have a conversation about that together. If there's an issue, capital projects and operations goes through it together. And the success is really this relationship. If you don't work with your capital people and they don't work with you, you will not get what you want, and they will always be lost and upset. So we really do work on that relationship, not only from getting along, but actually documentation of that relationship, so that we both know that when we get to the end, that we have a document in front of us that we both signed, which is a standard operating procedure, as well as all the documents through the progress of the project. So the next slide. And again. John, did you want to talk about this one?
Oh, just that this is your website. You referred to it earlier. This is your, standards website where folks can take a peek at both commissioning standards. So perhaps you can discuss those.
So we are a learning institution. Our job is to teach and to research and to provide the next generation with tools so they can be successful. As that type of an institution, we actually are very open to the public with respect to what we do, to the documents that we have and how we apply those documents. So we actually do have a website, as I spoke to earlier, with all of our standards. Right now it's under construction. We changed our system, our public facing system. So over probably the next week or so that they'll be under construction. The standards also form the basis of the tender and the agreement. We have a 10-year life cycle on typical large buildings. Of those buildings, we will probably be signing documents, business documents in year 5. We change our standards, as do most companies, on an annual basis, and sometimes more often than that. So you can appreciate that when you're going out for a tender on a building that you tendered 4 years ago, the standards that you tendered to are the standards that project abides to. So if you're going to run standards, please be prepared to the fact that in your go-to-market, you need to make sure that the standards you go to market with are well documented in the process so that you're not commissioning to today's standards when yesterday's standards are the business agreement. And we're very cognizant of that and do keep track of that very, very much. It sounds trivial, but it really isn't when you get into a project that's being built 3 years after you've gone to contract. Okay, we'll go to the next one.
So we're right on time for the webinar, the presentation here. I think now is a great time just to talk about lessons learned, right? So both Gordon and I, like you said, have been doing this a long time. We've got lots of different lessons learned, but here's some of the key ones. I'll go over mine, and then Gordon can finish. It's best that the owner, developer, whomever is the owner of this project or their representative, procure and pay for the commissioning provider. Okay, that's the way University of Toronto does it. We work directly for them, or the commissioning provider would. It certainly prevents any of those conflicts of interest. However, it is still acceptable for the commissioning provider to work for the architect or the prime consultant, and they would carry that. But again, at the end of the day, if there's a difference of opinion with the commissioning provider and the prime, the intent is, of course, as an advocate to the owner, that we have their best interests at all times, regardless of who we're being paid by. But it's important for the independent nature of commissioning to kind of work within this realm. So if there's any questions on that, then absolutely I can field those. But I think it's pretty self-explanatory why this is set up this way. All right, next, as Gordon outlined, the commissioning provider needs to be, pulled into the project as early as possible. But I want to kind of dispel a myth. The myth is that if you bring in a commissioning provider in earlier, that it's going to cost you more money. I've heard that a few different times. That's absolutely not the case. It's totally untrue. And I want to make sure that folks understand this. I'm going to provide the same level of documentation and the same overall effort, but it will perhaps be spread out a little bit more throughout the design phase. But as stated, it is extremely critical that we're brought in early enough so that those commissioning specs, that commissioning plan, of course, are there. That's our anchor to ensure that the construction team actually does what they say they're going to do. But it gives us enough time so that we're not reverse engineering that OPR document, right? That's brought in early enough, because I have been involved, and I'm sure Gordon has as well, in projects in which that OPR document, they're like, oh, shoot, we've totally forgot about that document. Even LEED projects, it's a requirement for all LEED projects to have it. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that document say, oh yeah, we've got a basis of design, but no OPR. We'll make one, and that'll be sufficient to check the box. That's not the way it's supposed to work, right? As we've outlined, the importance of that document sets the tone for the project team and prevent some of those early mistakes. independent commissioning must be on all projects. Gordon made a point there about, some folks just see commissioning as a waste of time. Obviously, I'm biased. I'm also president of the Building Commissioning Association. Clearly, I'm going to be biased. But the fact is that systems are far more complicated than they ever were. And the old adage of just because it's on doesn't mean it works. There used to be a time when a pump was wide open, 60 hertz and flowing, or a fan was going. It was either on or it wasn't. That's a long time ago. These systems are far more complicated. And on top of that, they're also integrated, right? In which one system speaks to another. And those systems need to be verified, because the reality is that when that equipment comes on site, I'll give you an example. We had a project in which there was close to 100 different rooftop units on a building. And that's the way the design was. Out of close to 100, I think it was 90 and change, there was about 18 of them that from the manufacturer had one issue or another. And I'm not talking small things. I'm talking compressors wouldn't stage, outside air dampers wouldn't function. They were showing 0%, closed or 0%, but there's about 20% of that vane or damper open, exhaust issues, all kinds of problems, right? So if you think that piece of equipment as it shows up is perfect, you better think again. So commissioning is extremely important for that down the road aspect to ensure that you've mitigated any of that risk, but that you end up with a building that performs the way you want. The only way to do that is to actually test it, right? Simulate that sequence of operation and then check either does it pass or does it fail? All right. And I speak briefly about it. Like I said, if there's any questions on, I can go into more detail. We've got time. But there's commissioning software available out there that helps with the documentation process. There's also building analytics. Now that can be baked into the building automation system. Obviously U of T has theirs, right? The reality is that this is not understood well enough within the industry. Mechanical, electrical design consultants as well, as to the power that this can provide, not just during the commissioning process, but also into the future, right? The ongoing commissioning, or OCX, as I like to call it. Having this ability to ensure that that building stays there, study after study indicates that there is a lot of energy left on the table, city to city to city across this planet. And the reason is things just don't work the way they're supposed to, and changes have been made unbeknownst to the owner or anybody else. Controls contract, right? If somebody's uncomfortable, there's a temperature complaint. I see it very often in which that entire sequence is negated so that they just go straight to whatever set point that person wants. And then anything downstream of that is affected as well. Okay. And then Gordon, I'll let you finish and round out lessons learned here. We got one here for you and you can add on to that.
Yes, I can't underline how important it is for that relationship within an organization. That is what keeps our world going here. Do we always agree? No way. But we do come out at the end and we do have basic principles that are documented and signed off. And if you take a look at our standards, you'll see that they are all signed off with reference to the commissioning and the BIS. And as we walk into more standards, we are signing them off formally. That just adds to the strength of, yes, you signed it off, and yes, I signed it off, and we're doing this together. I just want to talk to a couple of things that I keep walking into on projects. We see the failure point at the university when we go through a project life cycle as being the schematic design. We do beautiful OPRs. They're like 100 pages long, and they talk to everything. We take that, we go out and we find ourselves an architect, and then we find an M&E, and then we start it. And then we tell them, I want the SD in 6 weeks. We've already taken 3 years to get through the PPR, and I want the SD in 6 weeks. So we all know what the SD looks like at that point, right? It's like, what's going to keep them happy, and how do we get this turned around? Because we bid this job, and they're going to kill us if we don't turn up on time. I have talked to a number of large consultancies in town, the largest ones, and that is their biggest problem. Having to come up with a design, an SD, the alternatives, and come up with the end product for the DD, and not have time to do that. That is where we are all seeing failure. It's the creative part. It's where you actually conceptually design what's going on, even though you have the vision in the OPR. I want to talk about the basis of design. The basis of design is a huge document in our world. It is the document that helps us understand what is in that designer's mind, and that creativity, that energy that goes into that design that is only depicted on a drawing. You need to understand conceptually how they see that environment, or that atmosphere within that building coming to life, and how they see that happening. Because you can't take that off a drawing. You can't take that off of a discussion. It has to be documented, and it needs to be a living document from SD straight through to project delivery. And in fact, it's part of our delivery for our commissioning documents. We need to know what that is, because that not only ensures that, but it also melds well into creating the O&M documents. So I cannot stress how a well-formatted, detailed basis of design controls and keeps expectations, which can run rampant, aligned to where we started with the OPR and where we started with the initial project cost estimate, which can be hundreds of millions of dollars at the University of Toronto. Then I want to talk about the BAS. If you go through our BAS standard, it is either 85 or 100 pages long. It's very, very detailed, and there are very much requirements. We require it, obviously, to be BACnet IP. We require all of the points from the end point right up through what we call the patch panel before it goes up to IT. So we are the operations side of IT, and we design and control that. We need, and we require 100% on all communication starting at the end device right up to that patch panel, performed by the BAS supplier, signed off by the commissioning agent. And if it doesn't happen, we run a query at that level. And if there's 300 or 400 of those, you can imagine how much work it is. You're missing one, it goes back, and we're not telling you where it is. You go back and find it. So after a few trips through that, the world comes to order pretty quickly. And we do that because otherwise we don't know what didn't get commissioned. We don't know what is really happening in that building when we talk about further analytics. And since we run analytics here all the time and we watch our buildings through our EMRS system, that has to be correct. We then have an in-house system that we run, and so we continually watch that. I firmly believe that we should be able to, as an entity, stand on top of our buildings and keep control of them and know where they are within ranges all the time. The last topic is project closeout. Commissioning through a large building can actually close that building in 2 to 3 months. We all have stories of buildings that never close. We all have stories of buildings that we just put up with. We close off all of our buildings, all of our documents, as I said before, and we do it with integrity, and we put it in front of our faculties, and we put it in front of our other users, because commissioning is required to provide the documentation to let the project manager walk away and be done with it, as well as to let the operations people take it over and understand where they are. And that includes training on all the equipment. That includes training on all the systems. That includes non-conformances, very, very few non-conformances on aspects of the commissioning where we have found deviation from the beginning, and there will be there, but we need to get to the end of it, and we document that all the time. I currently have 100 projects ahead of me right now that are closing, and I can tell you each one of those projects will come to line with commissioning and that sign off. That's how we sell it to our project managers. This is your ability to walk away from a project clean so it does not haunt you for the rest of your career. On the other hand, operations, you need to step up to the line because when I sign off, you get it. So that is again another enabling strength to the relationship that we have here. Thank you.
No, I think that's perfect, and I will kind of jump on a couple things there. So also on the closeout side, we also put together a systems manual, right, which is obviously a very key document for operations to understand and have a narrative on how things actually function. Right, there's intent, and then of course, as things change or as sequences or overall intent changes. Even albeit minor, having that systems manual for operations is obviously a very important document. The other thing I want to jump in on is U of T has demanded, and rightfully so, that there's no sampling strategy for their systems, right? So in some buildings, it's and even in LEED, they outline that for identical pieces of equipment, so let's say terminal units, that you do 10%, 10 or 10%, whichever is greater. That's clearly not going to find all of the issues either. So U of T has demanded, and like you said, rightfully so, that there is no sampling strategy. Everything is tested 100%, so that there is full confidence rather than using a statistical, sample, a statistical model. So that's that concludes our presentation. Looks like we've got one question already, but Dawn, I'll let you take it away.
Well, thank you so much, both John and Gordon. I think everyone will agree with me. It's very insightful and interesting. So, yeah, the first question we've got is, so how do you manage the commissioning contract cost when you're brought in during design? The scope of commissioning and complexity can vary the cost greatly. So you're not going to necessarily know this at the very beginning. Do you typically quote an hourly rate?
I'll jump in. Gordon, you can finish it.
John, you're
but hey,
John, you're normally the guy that quotes, or one of them. So
that's right. So, like you said, yes, you're absolutely right. There's definitely some gray area. There's definitely some variability on that design phase. But if we can take a step back and just look to say, all right, we have X amount of meetings, right, in this scope, right, in the proposal or in the scope, we have X amount of meetings, and we're going to do X amount of reviews on the design, right, and we're going to assist and coordinate and help develop the OPR and review the BOD, then those things are all going to happen regardless, right? Is there going to be probably some extra meetings in there if we're brought in earlier? Yes, a few, but we're not talking, and that's why I want to dispel the myth about there's being extensive amount of cost if we bring the commissioning agent in earlier. It's not. We're talking maybe, at most $1,000 in meetings. That's really, in the grand scheme of things, for a typical project that, might be, for a large project, right, Gordon, we could be on the commissioning side of, $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 for commissioning services or more. Obviously there's a ton of variability. Small projects obviously are quite a bit less, but I don't want anyone to get lost in that little bit of minutia for that actual little bit of time on the design phase. But having that in the proposal and kind of outlining what those minimums are, I think for owners, developers, laboratories in general, include a few more meetings for that process. But that's basically it. Gordon?
We go to the market with a SIPSUM. We lay out very clearly what the OPR is. We lay out very clearly in the scope what the deliverable is. Our commissioning expectations are clearly defined on our internet connection, of which we refer to openly in our go-to-market document. Do we have hard discussions? Oh yeah, we have hard discussions. We have commissioning agents that decide that, well, I'm not going to send you a hard copy. Well, you better figure out how not to. Because we require and we very strictly define our expectations. Do we have change orders? Yes, we have change orders, but they're after discussion and understanding. And all business that's done at the university is actually goes out to an RFP for commissioning. It's actually brought back in, and I am typically part of that world as is the project management and maybe even the operations people to understand which one of the commissioning agents we believe have the capability of doing it, because not all of them do. So, and yes, we have had commissioning agents come and go, you know, if I bid for what you want, I won't get the job. And my reply to that is, if you bid for what you think will get the job and you sign up for the definition in that business agreement, then you're going to be working for free. And the person who does that will work for free once. Next time they'll bid correctly. So that's really where we are.
Good point. And then also on that, yeah, the vast majority of commissioning contracts are lump sum fixed fee, right? And there's some pros and cons to that, but clearly it's good for the owner. And as a commissioning provider, you have to sharpen your pencil and make sure, to Gordon's point, that you're accurate on your fee, right? So lump sum fixed fee, you know, it's really not an issue during the design phase. It's actually more during the testing and issues resolution phase where things get a bit sideways for us, because that's of course the heart of the time. The vast majority of our time that we spend is during that testing process, and that's typically where things go a bit off plan, if you will.
And we just to add to that, we do expect our commissioning agents to be on site, and we will ask the question about who is on site and at what level of the organization is that person, because we look at a commissioning agent as being as important as the engineer on site, because they need to know what is going on. So we press for on site.
Thank you for that. We've got another question here as well. So what is the duration for this level of commissioning, and can this partly overlap with occupancy?
Yes, absolutely. So there, unless it's a very small project, every project will have some level of overlap in occupancy, right? So again, if the project involves a chiller or a boiler, you can't be testing the chiller, you know, in the winter time, right? And you can't be testing a boiler plant in the heart of the, you know, in the, you know, heat of the summer. So those are going to be seasonal aspects, and we're going to test those when, of course, the outside air conditions will allow and there's appropriate load. So those will be overlapped during the occupancy phase. But for all intents and purposes, the vast majority of the testing can be done before occupancy, before substantial completion. I know, of course, that's an important part within U of T, and it should be for others. Getting the commissioning providers, you know, interim report and functional testing updates on how things are, and looking at that issues log to see whether or not they, as a team, want to grant substantial based on the issues to date.
Super, thank you. So we've got another question. We've got another couple of questions actually, but how do you engage the design team to collaborate in design reviews based on commissioning scope when the design team members were not included or did not include this in their scope? And is this something that the university should handle, considering it's not part of the design standards for the designers?
I believe, and I can be corrected on that, that in the document that goes out that is bid on, there is actually a requirement in that document for the designers to work with the commissioning agent in those worlds.
Yeah, it's actually outlined in the overall building commissioning standard as well. U of T's commissioning standard. It outlines, and so does CSA Z320, outlines that relationship. There needs to be there needs to be collaboration between those parties, right? So typically those consultants are hired at very close to one another in timeline, right? The design team and the commissioning provider are hired around the same time, if not the same time. So It's up to the owner to kind of outline what that requirement is, but absolutely there is going to be coordination between those parties.
I do know that in the business agreements that I've seen that that is in there, and it's not an expectation, it's a requirement. If it's not, it will be in there, but I'm sure it is.
It is, yep.
Okay.
I can do the next, do you want to answer the next question?
Yeah, so there is. So one of the requirements outlined in the U of T standards is the handover acceptance checklist. Can you confirm that the University of Toronto expects, or rather assigns, responsibility for things like O&M manuals and as-built drawings to the commissioning agent?
The commissioning agent is responsible for the documents and the compilation of those documents for presentation to us and for the signature. So yes, the O&M manuals and the as-built drawings are required as part of that document. They are not required. The O&M manuals are actually required of the commissioning agent. However, the as-built are required of the contractor, and they have to be in the commissioning document that I sign.
Yeah. So the commissioning provider would review those. Obviously, the contractor is going to help kick off that O&M manual, but the systems manual is something that that the commissioning provider would develop. But the O&M manual, which is an amalgamation of warranties and contact information and submittals and and as-built drawings too, those are reviewed for accuracy by the commissioning provider.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got time for one more or a couple more questions. So, what are some of the challenges you faced in your lab projects or commissioning experience?
Gord, I'll let you take this one.
Yes. Commissioning wasn't a big thing at the university some 6 or 8 years ago. And it was about getting the report, right? I've got a commissioning report. I'm finished the project. It's all over, but the report meant nothing. I called it the Hallmark card. And we needed to make sure that not only our internal community, but the external community who has to bid on these jobs understood that we are very serious about this. And we had to go do some lunch and learns with some of our service providers, so they understood the depth that we're willing to go to and the requirement to get there. We had a very good kickoff. We had a very large building, very prominent building in Toronto that wasn't closing well. And we went back to the commissioning and we went through it and we closed that building in 2 months. Whereas because we were going to a deadline and going to an expectation. When our senior management, our executives saw that we could close a building based on that discipline, that it was pretty much sold up through the university. So that it is very much ingrained in the way we do business. Other than that, you've got that, and there's always a design that may or may not work. And it's not because we have bad designers, it's because we expect you to be stretched a bit. And sometimes we have to actually go back after everything's been commissioned to the design and have that hard conversation about, but it's not delivering what you told me. To the point where we had a building that was run negative. And we all know we can't run a building negative. So based on that, we had to actually go back, and it wasn't through condition-based monitoring. It was actually our EMR system told us exactly what was happening with that building and why our costs went up X amount of money and everything. And we pulled in the commissioning agent, we pulled in the design engineers, and we said, guys, you didn't deliver. This was the deliverable regardless of what you designed. And you have to have the ability to walk out and have that conversation. And it's not easy, but it's required because that sets future expectation. Okay.
Nope, I think that's a great point. I will just from the consulting side say that some of the bigger challenges, of course, relate specifically to the construction side, but also this misnomer that if I bought brand new equipment and I've got a good design or even a great design, and I've got a great contractor and great subs and a great balancer and a great controls contractor. And even if they meant well, the biggest challenge is dispelling this myth or this misnomer that everything should work out great, right? I should leave this up to the contractor to ensure that these things are working appropriately. The reality is that can't happen. That's the fox guarding the hen house, right? They are going, it's human nature. They're going to take some shortcuts when pushed up against schedule and money and budget. They are going to take some shortcuts, and it's our job there to trust but verify. We're going to actually, verify that. And one thing that Gordon did mention is another thing on labs. If we are, and this was a U of T project, if we are going to be working on a building, an existing building, and doing a retrofit, in a lot of ways, those are more difficult than new construction, where you're working with a blank slate. And I would stress to the folks that want to go down that path of doing a fit out in half the building, let's say it's an older building, or you're not quite sure what the enclosure, what the envelope, integrity is, or what the, condition of the existing equipment is, to have some pre-planning and actually get some values before you start, right? Do some pre-balancing, get to confirm what this building's actually doing before, then you can actually make an informed decision about what to do about it afterwards. And this is a different project, not a U of T project, but I've had a few of them kind of go sideways in that here's what we spec'd, and lo and behold, it wasn't enough to to allow the building to do what it was supposed to do.
That's great. Thank you so much. So thank you again, John and Gordon, and I'm sure all of the delegates will agree with me. It was a very interesting webinar. I would just like to remind all of our members and delegates that the webinar has been recorded, and you can find it online at the Sustainable Labs Canada website under resources and events. Also next month, we've got Liam Brown and some colleagues from McCallum Sather who'll be presenting on designing a laboratory community, how to design labs without stakeholders. So that should be interesting. So I encourage everybody to sign up. Okay, so that leaves me to say thank you once again to Gordon and John. Really, really interesting presentation, and thank you to all of our members for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.